Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. 4 people in Chicago face felony hate crime charges, in addition to many other charges, after they allegedly kidnapped and tortured a mentally disabled man and broadcast that hideous attack on Facebook. Video shows the attackers, who were black, yelling F Donald Trump and F white people. Craig Wall of WFLD Fox Chicago has been covering this story all day, and he joins us for an update. Craig, what's the latest?
The superintendent today called this video reprehensible, and prosecutors officially called it a crime, filing those charges against the 4 suspects. They include a hate crime, kidnapping, battery, as well as unlawful imprisonment, and some additional charges against the 2 sisters, as well as one of the suspects who is a friend. The video happened on Tuesday. We know that's when the torture happened, but it all actually began on Saturday when the victim got together with one of the suspects, a friend of his, Jordan Hill, for a sleepover for New Year's. They ended up in Chicago at the apartment of those 2 sisters, and police say it all started when there was a friendly fight that escalated. Things got ugly, and then all of a sudden the 2 sisters got mad about what had happened. Police said that the suspects had all been drinking and smoking marijuana. That's when they bound and tortured that 18-year-old victim who is mentally challenged. The torturing went on for 4 to 5 hours, police said. The noise from it created so much of a commotion that neighbors down below went upstairs, knocked on the door, and said, "Hey, knock it off or we're going to call police." We're told the 2 sisters then went downstairs, broke open the door of that neighbor's apartment, and threatened them. Police were then called, and during that time, that is when the victim was able to escape his attackers. A police officer who happened to pull up in response to the complaint saw the victim, who was outside walking. He was dressed in a tank top, inside out and backwards, wearing shorts and walking in sandals, looking battered and bloodied. The officer went up to the victim and tried to talk to him, found he was very discombobulated, and that's when police actually called an ambulance and got him taken in. The 4 suspects were then taken into custody. Just a short time ago, the victim's family, a representative, spoke briefly, saying that they have seen the video, found it very, very disturbing, as everyone else has. They said the victim himself is doing okay, but beyond that, they didn't have a whole lot to say. The 4 suspects will be in bond court to face these charges tomorrow, and we could learn even more about what went on from prosecutors. Back to you in New York.
Craig Wall for us in Chicago. Thanks a lot, Craig. Before we get to the next guest, let's listen to part of that tape again in case you haven't heard it. Here it is.
Donald Trump, white people, what?
No. Goof.
Yeah.
My sister's a bit with Trump.
So is this revolting attack a sign that anti-Trump hysteria is fueling violence? Does it stand for anything larger? And is the national media downplaying its existence? We're joined now by nationally syndicated radio talk show host Richard Fowler. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Tucker.
So I was interested to see this morning that the New York Times This Week in Hate feature had no mention of this story. Why would that be?
I don't know. I'm not an editor of the New York Times. I think that this story is...
Why did the Washington Post bury it? Why did the Boston Globe bury it?
I don't work at either of those publications, but I will say this. I think this is a hate crime. I'm happy that the new attorney, the new Cook County prosecutor charged these people with this, and it's wrong. And I think what we need to now focus on, whether it's black or white or gay or straight, is making sure that we continue to have hate crime laws like this throughout the country that protect people like this individual that was brutalized by those 4 maniacs.
Well, I don't believe in hate crimes laws because I don't think you should prosecute people based on their thoughts. But I do believe
So you don't think this is a hate crime?
I think hate was involved, as it often is in crimes. I'm not defending this crime. I'm merely saying it's a separate category. Hate crimes devalue the idea of equality under the law, so I'm opposed to them. But I'm also opposed to lying and downplaying something that is obvious. And it's clear that this man's race and his political position played a role
absolutely, which is
in
why
the torment that he endured. Well, and that's not at all clear from the accounts that were prevalent today. The Associated Press, in its first account of the story, didn't mention the racial and political angles of the story. I wonder why that is.
I don't know. I don't work for the Associated Press. I think what we can say here...
theme here? You got the New York Times,
what I can say here is that the charges came down from the prosecutor, which is the final arbiter. No journalist is an arbiter of this case.
Right.
The prosecutor is, and eventually a jury of these 4 individuals' peers, and those came down and said this is a hate crime. It was fueled by race, it was fueled by ideology, and it's wrong. And that's why we need stronger hate crimes in this country to prevent incidents like this, and incidents that go the opposite direction.
Yeah. So we can have the government dividing our thoughts and prosecuting
No, that's not what I'm saying.
But here's the point I'm making. When a sensational crime like this occurs, the press is very quick, and people on television are very quick. Instantaneously, they draw massive conclusions. They extrapolate from it, and they say this is a national trend. When that lunatic shut up the black church in the South, Dylan Roof, we had a national conversation on white racism. Now, I'm not against such a national conversation, but if you're going to extrapolate from something like that, why the instantaneous downplaying of this as four crazy people?
I don't think,
and an isolated disabled man.
No, I don't think.
Larger.
I don't think anybody's isolating this at all. I think
really?
if you look at the reporting that we've seen today, if you look at people just reporting the facts, which is this individual was charged with a hate crime, which means this prosecutor, based upon the standards for a hate crime in the state of Illinois, thought that these four individuals were in violation of a hate crime, just like Dylan Ruth, according to the statutes in South Carolina, were in violation of a hate crime. That's for prosecutors to decide, not for journalists.
Well, but we also draw conclusions from events. That's part of our job here in the commentariat. Simone Sanders, a Democratic strategist on CNN you might know, said this, quote, "This is not a hate crime. Hate crimes are because of a person's racial ethnicity, religion, gender, a disability. It isn't your political leanings because someone doesn't like your political leanings."
I disagree with Simone.
Okay. You had Don Lemon saying, I don't think it's evil. I don't think it's evil. I think these are young people, and I think they just had bad home training.
Last night on the Kelly Files, I called this a hate crime. I was probably one of the first Democratic commentators to do so because it's a hate crime. It's a hate crime. It's wrong. It's vile. It's disgusting. And what this should cause us to do, Tucker, is it should cause all of our Americans, whether you're black, white, Hispanic, Jewish, Muslim, to say, we are moving into a new presidency. How do we come to the table? Because this is not America, right? I would argue, this is not America as the Tulsa, Oklahoma shooting where that man was shot down by the police officer. How do we come together and have a conversation about making our country better? How do we have a conversation about looking beyond race, looking beyond gender, looking beyond realizing that
totally
we're all hardworking Americans?
You know the truth, which is you walk into a certain neighborhood, you're the wrong color, and you're liable to get in trouble. Okay, that is just true. I know it firsthand. So you can't say that out loud in most venues because it doesn't fit a pre-prescribed narrative.
But that's part of the problem. You need to have these conversations, right?
Good.
So when I go to Friendship Heights, which is in the D.C. area, or any high-end boutique, and I'm followed around by a sales clerk because I happen to be African American, it's the same as you going and getting in trouble in a black neighborhood. We have to have these conversations in order for us to break the stigma down. So when it happens to me, I go to the manager and say, you know, your clerk is following me. I'm in here to make a purchase. This is wrong, and we need to work on fixing it.
A man called Colin Borchers from the Washington Post wrote this, and I think it sort of sums up perfectly the attitude from the left here. If the attackers had been white and the victim had been black, the incident would have, of course, conjured America's ugly history of white mobs committing violence against black people. There's no parallel history of the reverse happening or anything remotely approaching the same scale. Now, that may be right on the merits, but it is an obvious attempt to downplay the significance of this because what's at stake, as you know, is victim status. And the idea that a Trump supporter might be a victim of a crime based on his political belief. Okay, but nobody wants to give up
the prosecutor
status here.
The prosecutor is very clear in her
determination. Then why are all these liberals trying to say that this is just one isolated example when you've seen time and again?
You cannot. Here's the problem. This is not. I would argue that a hate crime is a hate crime. It's not. It doesn't have a political tilt to it. Dylan Ruth. We don't blame Republicans for Dylan Ruth. No, and we shouldn't blame Democrats for these four.
Are you joking?
I never blamed Republicans.
Well, good
for Dylan
you.
Ruth.
I'm glad to have one reasonable person on this show.
And I think there's very people. Dylan Ruth is a rage maniac racist.
Were you in this country when that happened? I mean, but by the way, let me just say, I agree with what you're saying.
Right.
But what I disagree with is your unwillingness to acknowledge what's been happening for the past 3 or 4 years in this country. There's a mass shooting that fits a prescribed media narrative, and all of a sudden everyone who supports Trump or is white is responsible.
No, let's be very clear. So after the Dylan Ruth case, there was a campaign to take down the Confederate flag from flying over South Carolina, which is was the right thing to do. And the governor, Republican governor,
they banned the Dukes of Hazzard from television, as if every Southerner or every person who liked to watch the Dukes of Hazzard was implicated in a crime.
No. We're having, that's two different conversations. I think with the Dylan Ruth incident brought to light
They
was the
did
fact
that after Dylan Roof.
Well, let me make the point. Well, after the Dylan Roof incident, what brought to light the fact that in South Carolina, the Confederate flag flies over the Capitol. Both Democrats and Republicans in South Carolina agreed it was a bad idea. Waving the Confederate flag, which is the flag that stands for racism, bigotry, and hatred, is
that had
wrong.
something to do. Look, it's demagoguery that tries to tie people who are not responsible for a specific crime to. In my mind,
yes,
they banned the Dukes of Hazzard from television.
But we're having a conversation about four individuals who committed a hate crime and the Confederate flag.
Just apply the same standard.
I have
to all crimes.
I absolutely have. Okay. But you can't lump the whole party in with it. That's the argument I'm making. It's a hate crime. It's wrong. It's disgusting. It shouldn't happen. It should be a time to bring our country together.
You're not being honest, Richard. You're
I'm being absolutely honest. How are you going to tell me what standard I'm applying?
We're out of time.
Good to see you, Tom.
Nice to see you, Richard. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Top U.S. intelligence officials visited Capitol Hill today where they reiterated their belief that the Russian government actively meddled in the U.S. election. Here are some highlights from today's testimony.
Every American should be alarmed by Russia's attacks on our nation.
The hacking was only one part of it.
In the aftermath of an unprecedented attack on our democracy.
It also entailed classical propaganda, disinformation, fake news.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time now not to throw pebbles but to throw rocks. Putin's up to no good and he better be stopped.
Well, Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is covering this story at the Capitol tonight, and she joins us from there. Catherine, what's going on?
Well, thank you, Tucker. Really, the bottom line is that the witnesses testified that they're more confident today than they were back in October that this was Russian interference, that it came from the highest levels of the government. But no one blamed Vladimir Putin by name, and no one said that this was done to help Donald Trump win and to make sure Hillary Clinton lost. They did testify that it was a multifaceted campaign that involved the theft of the emails from the DNC and the Clinton campaign, as well as disinformation, as well as fake news. But they also testified that they never found any evidence that the voting on the ballots was changed in any way, and they really couldn't speak to the impact on public opinion and whether that influenced how they voted at the end of the day. Now, there's several reports here. We've got this classified report that went to the president today. This will also be briefed to Congress, and then the president-elect will get his briefing tomorrow. And then early next week, we believe Monday, based on our reporting, there will be an unclassified report that's available to the public. And the witnesses testified today. They're going to try and be very forward-leaning in providing a lot of detail about who exactly was pulling the strings on this thing and what their motivation and intent was, Tucker.
So what is the significance of, if any, Catherine, of the timing here?
Look, I've been covering this area for more than a decade, and it's always important to look at the timing of events. You know from working in this town, when there's a big rollout of information, this tends to be almost choreographed by the party that's in power. And we asked the White House today, if the report was just final this week, how was it that the administration imposed sanctions on Russia last week and then expelled 35 Russian diplomats if they didn't have the final report? And what they said is that they wanted a forceful response and they didn't need more information to do that. But it begs the question, what does a forceful response mean when the hacking is well documented and it began over a year ago, Tucker?
Right. That's the question right there. Catherine, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Well, for more on Russia's alleged electoral malfeasance, we're joined now by former House Speaker, author, and informal Donald Trump advisor, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
So what's the truth, in your view, at the bottom of this? To what extent did the Russians interfere in this election?
No more than the United States interferes all over the world through the U.S. Information Agency. I mean, I don't see any, apparently, and I have not seen the report, apparently the report says they didn't change any votes. I don't even understand what the word hacking means in this context. They apparently did not go in to try to change any votes in any precinct in America.
Right.
So the American people voted without interference. The Russians may have engaged in disinformation. Whether that's more disinformation than the New York Times routinely engages in, I have no idea. And I don't take it very seriously. I mean, this is a country where Al Jazeera is available by cable, for Pete's sake.
So you heard a number of different intelligence officials express outrage that President-elect Trump was, in effect, degrading what they do or casting aspersions on their honesty.
Oh, well, I'm happy to cast aspersions. I believe we have clear evidence over and over again that there are people very high in the intelligence community who have been politically redesigning what they say and who were trying to respond to what they thought the Obama administration wanted. We have a clear case in the Central Command where 50 different analysts signed a letter, which is very unusual, saying that their commanding general had been pressuring them to understate the power of ISIS to fit the White House's definition. Well, that's a clear public. There's an Inspector General investigation right now. And they were basically saying their implication was that the Director of National Intelligence was putting pressure on the Central Command to produce reports that fit the White House's worldview.
That would be James Clapper.
That would be James Clapper, who I've known and is a good friend, and I've thought very highly of James over the years. But the fact is, those 50 analysts argue that the pressure was on to issue reports that understated the danger of ISIS.
So am I misremembering this? This is James Clapper who said today, the Director of National Intelligence, as you said, who said, and I'm quoting, "Our assessment is now even more resolute that Russia interfered in this election," which is a politically charged thing to say. Is this the same James Clapper who assured the country that the NSA was not spying on Americans and turned out to be lying when he said that?
Well, that's the whole, look, the whole challenge you've got, and we probably need a national dialogue. I'm not sure we need a national debate, but we need a national dialogue about how the modern world's going to work. You have Sony gets hacked, presumably by North Korea, although we don't totally know that. The fact is we don't have a very good grip on how this stuff works and who does what. And you have people who have false flag operations. So maybe it was the Russians, or maybe it was the Chinese pretending to be the Russians. Or, I mean, we don't understand all this stuff. I am very suspicious that this has been going on for, I mean, what does it say to you about the American intelligence system? This has been going on for over a year. They don't really discover it until Trump wins. I mean,
do you think,
why weren't they saying it 6 or 8, 9 months
Having
ago?
been around this a lot, to the extent you can surmise, do you think actually the intelligence community doesn't know that's possible?
I think no. Let me say up front, I'm very sympathetic to how hard it is to know things that are secret. I mean, I went through and reviewed the weapon of mass destruction report that was the base of the Iraq campaign under Bush. And I think it was honestly their best assessment. It was an assessment which the Russians, the Italians, the British, and the French all agreed with.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be wrong, because the nature of intelligence is you often don't know things even if you think you know them.
That's right.
And we overvalue it in that sense. It's important, but you shouldn't say that it's definitive. Cyber behavior, cyber warfare is a new world. None of us have a very good grip on it. The National Security Agency is probably the best in the world, but they're the best in a way that is shrinking because the zones of grayness are getting bigger. Right. The number of players are getting bigger. There are more and more small groups of criminal hackers who are astonishingly successful, who steal hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And in this environment, what I find suspicious, if you will, and I don't want to overstate it.
Right.
The President of the United States, Barack Obama, is in essence telling us that in the last year of his administration, after he'd had 7 years to fix this, something may have been going on for 12 months that they're not totally sure of. But now in the last weeks, they have decided to issue a report which is filled with uncertainty while they're saying they're certain.
Right. Posing as absolute certainty. In that way, it's a classic Washington summation, I would say. Mr. Speaker, thanks a lot for joining us.
Good to see you.
Time now for Twitter Storm, our nightly forecast of social media's most powerful weather patterns. Tonight, a simple question about a pickup truck is sending shockwaves through the press. It all started when Decision Desk Daily's John Ekdahl tweeted this. He said, the top 3 best-selling vehicles in America are pickups. Question to reporters, do you personally know someone who owns one? A pickup, that is. Well, the response was sensitive. Washington Post national correspondent Jose de Real said this, yes, because I'm from Alaska. Do any friends own one in D.C. or New York? No, because they're unnecessary here. Sort of missing the point of the question. In other words, no. Vox columnist Will Willickson tweeted this: how many journalists know someone who owns a ferret? Going the non sequitur route. Mother Jones engagement editor Ben Dreyfuss said, quote, "This is a very silly question. To wit, the top 3 population centers in America are liberal strongholds. Do you personally know someone there?" Ooh, burn. And finally, New York Times science writer John Schwartz, who covers climate change, tweeted this: "That might be the dumbest question I have heard today. Of course I do. Hell, that's how I learned to drive a stick. Other buddies with pickups since then, of course. This need to demonize reporters as un-Americans gets so old." That's where he's wrong. That need never gets old, ever. It's like a fruitcake. It tastes good one day, 20 years later, it still tastes good. That's tonight's Twitter Storm. How tough are things for American newspapers? So tough that even children can buy one. The fact is here, a 19-year-old in Arkansas just bought his own hometown newspaper. He's got big plans for it, and he joins us next. Also, we're taking the Trump Tower live for a report straight ahead.
Starting Monday, every weeknight, 9 is Tucker Time. Nothing off limits. Nope.
Well, American newspapers have been hurtling toward oblivion for decades, unfortunately, but one very brave 19-year-old in Arkansas thinks now is the time to enter the newspaper business. Despite having no professional experience in journalism, or maybe because of it, he was brave enough to purchase his hometown paper. His name is Hayden Taylor, and he bought the Central Delta Argus Sun, which he plans to make great again. Mr. Taylor joins us now. Hayden, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You bought the paper. Let me just say at the outset, I'm impressed. Most people your age are running toward Snapchat, but you're going toward newsprint. How did you afford a newspaper at the age of 19?
Well, as of right now, we've been working really on a handshake. It's been very unofficial. It's been honestly a big cobble work, but we've been able to get it by, and it's been well within what I can afford.
Well, good for you. Why would you want to do this?
Well, a paper, especially in eastern Arkansas, and I didn't know this until I'd actually gotten involved with the Argus Sun, that it is a badge of pride for a community, and I think that it's a worthwhile endeavor to try and keep it alive for as long as it can be.
Well, good for you. I once worked in a newspaper in Arkansas, the statewide daily, the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, a great paper. So I identify with the desire. But, I mean, there's nobody else in your age cohort. There's not one person you went to high school with who was thinking, you know, I want to buy a newspaper or work at a newspaper or read a newspaper for that matter. So what's your plan to keep this paper alive where so many others have failed?
Well, I'm very aware that the national trend has been the downfall of newspapers, but in my particular area, there is still a demand for a paper, and as long as there's a demand, I'm willing to invest in being the supplier. It's been a little bit of a struggle getting off the ground, but as of now, things are going very smoothly.
Well, so now that you're the sort of William Randolph Hearst of the Argus Sun, I mean, you got to misuse your power at a certain point. I mean, do you want to do something crazy with the paper every once in a while? I mean, write editorials against people you don't like, or give bad reviews to movies you didn't care for? I mean, what are you doing to make the paper yours?
Well, everybody is pretty well aware. I mean, I'm 19, no journalistic experience. I'm not going to bite off more than I can chew. What I'm trying to do right now is keep people on staff that do know exactly what they're doing.
Right.
And I've kept the staff from the old Argus Sun, and they've proven to be fantastic at just this transition. But I don't really, until I'm experienced and until it's all set in stone and everything's moving along smoothly, I'd rather not write my own editorial column, but I'd rather cover the news and allow people to write an editorial column because I'm 19, my input, we'll live without it.
Boy, you are a self-aware young man. I read one account that said it was amazing that you're now running a paper because you only took one journalism class. And I thought, that is so much better. So you haven't been destroyed by taking journalism classes. You're still a normal person.
Well, I don't know about that entirely, but I'm doing my best to learn this as fast as I can, and I really think this is kind of trial by fire. So I'm ready to keep moving and just learn.
Last question. Are you going to endorse candidates?
Endorse who?
Endorse candidates when they run in your county? All these politicians are going to come and suck up to you. They're going to want editorial board meetings. They're going to sit there and glad hand you and try to convince you their program is right. Are you going to sit with them and listen to their pitches?
If they want to run an ad, I'll run an ad. If otherwise, no special treatment. I'd rather not get involved for fear of conflict of interest.
That's the spirit. No journalism classes, and you're already beating a lot of people at the Washington Post. Hayden, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, Donald Trump fires a salvo at Chuck Schumer today, calling the Senate minority leader, the head clown of the Democrats. We'll tell you what that fight is about. Coming up.
Starting Monday, every weeknight, 9 is Tucker Time. Nothing off limits, no holds barred.
I'm asking questions that I think you would ask, and I'm kind of demanding that they answer them.
And no bull.
I'm upfront. If I think something, I say it.
Tucker is taking prime time to the next level. Every weeknight, now at 9. Don't miss Tucker Carlson tonight.
Well, the Capitol Hill cataclysm over Obamacare has just begun. Today, the combatants were Donald Trump and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Today, Trump tweeted, quote, "The Democrats, led by head clown Chuck Schumer, know how bad Obamacare is and what a mess they are in. Instead of working to fix it, they do the typical political thing and blame. The fact is, Obamacare was a lie from the beginning. Keep your doctor, keep your plan. It's time for Republicans and Democrats to get together and come up with a health care plan that really works. Much less expensive and far better, exclamation point." Well, Senator Schumer shot back with this.
Instead of calling names, President-elect should roll up his sleeves and show us a replacement plan that will cover the 20 million Americans who gained coverage.
Well, former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, a man who's been around politics for a while, joins us now. Governor, thanks for coming on. So, Trump's not I know you're not a Trump voter.
Congratulations on your new show.
Well, thank you very much.
Right.
Hope you'll come on. You're not a Trump voter, but you got to concede Trump does have a point here. He had no role in creating or passing Obamacare. It was a purely Democratic operation passed on a party line vote, and it's not working very well. Parts of it are fine, but parts of it are a disaster. And Chuck Schumer's attempt to pretend that it's Donald Trump's fault is a little much, no?
No, look, what Schumer is saying, what Democrats are saying, and 20 million Americans that might lose coverage is, okay, Republicans, you want to repeal it? Fine, but what's your alternative? And so far in the last 7 years, I have not seen a Republican alternative. I mean, what's going to happen to the pre-existing condition? Will that be eliminated? What about those kids between 21 and 26 years old? Will they be covered? Will costs go down? I mean, there's no beef there on the Republican side. And I think what Schumer is asking legitimately is, okay, you want to repeal it? What's your alternative? What are you proposing? That's all he's saying.
I mean, I think we both know that pre-existing conditions and the ability to keep your kids on until late middle age or whatever it is are both very popular and they will stay. The costs, as you know, have risen, so it's not a question of bringing them down. It's a question of just stopping the rise. But the real question is, would Democrats, if they were in charge, keep it the way it is? I mean, is that the alternative Schumer is suggesting? It's doing fine, let's just keep it? Does anyone believe that?
I think what President Obama said and what Democrats are looking at is, yeah, there's no question, especially during the election period, some of the premiums went up. How can we keep the costs down? I think that is a legitimate issue. There are issues relating to states and Medicaid. You know, a lot of states, a lot of Republican governors, including the one here in New Mexico, chose to continue using Medicaid. The big problem, Tucker, is in the interim period between the repeal and a new law, which some Republicans have said will take 6 months, what's the alternative? What's going to happen to all these people, 20 million, that are under Obamacare? And it's not just poor people. It's the middle class. It's Anglos, Hispanics. As you know, you were talking in your previous segment, it should cover everybody.
Well, I don't think it's quite a racial question, but I mean, 20 million out of a country of 335 million, not a huge. I mean, the truth is the system itself doesn't work, and I think most Democrats privately will concede that. So why wouldn't the Democrats say, here are our ideas for reforming it? I'd hate to think that because it's this president's signature achievement, they wouldn't want to concede that it doesn't work, but they know it doesn't work. Why don't they admit it?
Well, I mean, look, the reality is that Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So now it's their responsibility to govern. So what is wrong
at the end of the month,
with Republicans saying repeal? All right, you want to repeal, but what's the alternative? I have not seen an alternative on their side. So the burden is on those that won the election. And I think Donald Trump legitimately won the election. I'm worried about his criticism of the intelligence community and denying Russian hacking. But I concede and I want him to succeed. He is my president, although, you know, during this period, he's not respected the presidential transition. There's only one president. He's tweeting policy and programs before he even takes office, and that's not right. That makes me uncomfortable.
It's not right for him to express his opinion before he's sworn in. But let me just ask you, so you saw the Democrats on the Hill with their sign, Make America Sick Again, which is what they claim Trump will do. If you look at life expectancy in the United States, it's gone up for some groups since Obamacare passed, but it's declined precipitously for other groups. The outcome doesn't seem to be at all what we have expected. A lot of people are dying earlier than they did when Obama took office. Does that factor into your consideration about whether Obamacare was successful?
Well, yeah, look, I think it has been successful. Yeah, there are flaws. We can make it better. Maybe
people
too much
dying earlier?
bureaucracy, some of the cost issues. Yeah, well, you know, that's not good. But, you know, 70 today, and I'm not there yet, is, you know, the 50s and 60s of the past. You don't have to worry about that. You're still a young guy. But I think at the same time, Tucker, let's reform it. Let's make it better, but not repeal it with no alternative. This is not going to be good policy, and it's not going to be good politics.
Well, I think if they repeal it with no alternative, that indeed would be bad. Hard to imagine that happening, but we'll see. Governor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Donald Trump once again spent the day in New York City. Fox News national correspondent John Roberts is outside Trump Tower. He was on the road with Trump for a year or more. John, great to see you tonight.
It only seems like it was a year or more, Tucker. Imagine that. Good to see you tonight. Hey, the business pretty much wrapped up here at Trump Tower. That Donald Trump is still tweeting. We'll get to that in just a second. The big news today is that Donald Trump has settled on his choice for the new Director of National Intelligence. It'll be the retiring senator from Indiana, Dan Coats. He served 3 terms in the Senate. They're not consecutively. He sat on the Select Committee on Intelligence and Armed Services, was also the ambassador to Germany for a time, and was famously kept out of Russia, which he sort of wears like a badge of honor. The official announcement could come as early as tomorrow. That's when Donald Trump has a significant intelligence briefing, the same report that President Obama saw on the alleged Russian hacking, and that has set Donald Trump to tweeting tonight. Apparently NBC tonight had an exclusive look at the classified report. Donald Trump writing in Twitter, quote, "How did NBC get, quote, an exclusive look into the top secret report Obama was presented? Who gave them this report and why? Politics." And Trump also tweeting the Democratic National Committee would not allow the FBI to study or see its computer info after it was supposedly hacked by Russia. So clearly, this is very much on the president-elect's mind as he gets set to meet with James Clapper, the current DNI, John Brennan, who's the CIA director, and James Comey, the FBI director, in what will be a very big intelligence briefing tomorrow. At the same time, the Trump transition has been beating back against a Wall Street Journal report out this morning that Trump plans on significantly restructuring the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the CIA, paring back staff at the DNI, which Donald Trump is said to believe in this report to be bloated and politicized. Clearly, by these tweets tonight, he does think that there's a lot of politics in intelligence. And with the CIA thinking of trimming back some of the staff at the headquarters and putting more people out in the field. Sean Spicer, who is the incoming press secretary, beat back strongly against that on the transition conference call this morning, saying it's just not true. Listen to what Spicer said.
The president-elect's top priority would be to ensure the safety of the American people and the security of the nation, and he's committed to finding the best and most effective ways to do it. But I want to reiterate, there is no truth to this idea of restructuring the intelligence community infrastructure. It is 100% false.
Donald Trump also clarifying his stance on Julian Assange after tweeting earlier this week what Assange said about Russia not being involved in dispensing the information that WikiLeaks leaked. A lot of people thought that he was supporting Assange, and he didn't have the disclaimer on his Twitter feed that says retweets are not an endorsement. Trump coming out today to say, I'm not supporting Assange. I'm simply restating what he has said. People say I'm not a fan of intelligence. That's absolutely incorrect. I am a big fan. Though transition sources do tell us, Tucker, that Donald Trump would like to streamline the intelligence community and depoliticize it as well. Tucker?
John Roberts from Trump Tower. Thanks a lot, John. Well, campus autocrats have struck once again, this time at the University of Oregon. Law professor Eugene Volokh will tell us why this threatens the free speech rights of all of us. He's next. Well, America's universities are teeming with countless petty tyrants. Recently at the University of Oregon, a professor was suspended for wearing blackface to a Halloween party, even though she says she was trying to send an anti-racist message by doing it. Law professor Eugene Volokh says that Oregon's decision is a harbinger of the destruction of free speech rights on American campuses. Professor Volokh joins us now. Professor, thanks for coming on. So,
thanks for having me.
If you'll just reassure me that I'm not missing something in the story. This professor wore blackface to a party. She was trying to represent a book that she thought that would evoke. And she says she wasn't doing this as part of some sort of minstrel show or to offend anyone, but to take a stand against racism. And moreover, no one at the party complained. Are those the facts as you know them?
First, it was a party at her own house. There were some students that she'd invited. She'd invited her classes, as many professors do. It's a party at her own house. There's apparently some indication that some students there felt somewhat uneasy. But the concern was that the students were upset, and then other students who heard about it later on at the law school got upset. And lots of them heard about it because the law school made a big deal of having also these discussions about it. And that itself, the university said, that itself helped create the hostile environment that made her speech punishable.
Okay, so that's what and they said it in pretty clear terms, that the actual disruption and harm to the university resulting from what she did are significant enough to outweigh her interest in academic freedom and freedom of speech. So they're in effect saying that by dressing this way, she caused harm to people at the school?
Well, not only are they saying that, the implication is the same with regard to any kind of speech, even outside of school, that might be seen as racially offensive, whether intentionally or not, as religiously offensive. Imagine somebody goes to somebody's house and there's a poster of the Muhammad cartoons. I actually blogged the Muhammad cartoons at one point on my blog. Say somebody reads my blog and they say, oh no, I'm now offended for religious reasons because I'm Muslim, the hypothetical person would say. Then a whole bunch of other students make a big thing of this. The school starts having more discussions, and then the university comes in and says, oh, it's now so disruptive, in large part because the school has actually made a big thing of this, that now Volokh is going to be punished for it, and any other professor as well.
They get away with this, it seems to me, not by saying we're against free speech. Nobody wants to say that out loud, though of course they are. But by equating words they disagree with violence. I feel unsafe when you say that, Ed.
Well, that's a big part of it. A lot of students say that. The university is more saying that it's discrimination. And it's true that if a professor decides to grade down a student because of their race or religion, that's obviously a violation of the law, a violation often of the Constitution. But what they're doing is they're saying that speech that offends certain groups is tantamount to illegal discrimination. So they're indeed recharacterizing speech as conduct that is now stripped of protection.
No, I mean, no one's defending offensive speech. I'm not. But once freedom of speech goes, it's over. That's it, I think. Mr. Volokh, thanks a lot.
That's absolutely right. And again,
it is right. It is right. Please finish your sentence.
Yeah, and again, this is not just about allegedly racially offensive speech. The same thing could apply, by the way, to speech that is critical of homosexuality or critical of certain claims about gender identity and transgender status. So long as some identifiable group can be really offended by this and then can turn, and this offense turns into more disruption at school, that's reason enough to suspend or perhaps even fire a tenured faculty member.
That's right. Or ultimately, even political speech will qualify as disruptive.
Well, this was a form of political speech.
That's right. Exactly. Professor, thanks a lot for joining us. That was interesting and ominous.
Thanks for having me.
Straight ahead, the great Melissa Francis joins us in the Friend Zone. That's next. Time now for the Friend Zone. We invite one of our friends within the building here at Fox onto the show. Lots of people at Fox have had lives before Fox, but very few have had a life as interesting as Fox Business Network's Melissa Francis. Melissa, it's great to see you tonight.
Great to see you. I'm so excited to be associated with you tonight because you're like the king of cable. So I just wanted to rub off on me.
Right. I don't feel very kingly, but thank you very much. So you, long before you got into this business, were an actor, and I'm sure many of our viewers know that, but you're writing, I think, a book in part about that. Explain.
That's true. I have a new book that comes out in April. Oh, there's the cover right there. And basically, most self-help books are really annoying. This one will actually make you snort with laughter, mostly at me. I make fun of myself through almost the whole book, but then along the way, I came up with some good lessons and some great formulas to kind of tackle the problems that dog everyone. And what I realized was, and when I left Hollywood, which is insane, as you know, that a lot of the great values that I learned on the prairie really apply to the rest of your life and the rest of America outside of Hollywood, like self-reliance, independence, hard work, all those kind of things.
Oh, I love that. So how old were you when you started Little House on the Prairie?
So I was 8 years old when I was, pardon me, I got a frog in my throat there because I'm just so nervous to be on with you, Tucker, since you're the king of cable. No, I was on the show when I was 8 years old. I was only on for 2 seasons, but it was a lot of fun. You know, Michael Landon was very spirited, as most people know. But he was very hardworking. You know, he was an entrepreneur. He owned that show. I don't know if people realize when he left Bonanza, he took that formula and he redid it on Little House. And he owned it, he produced it, he wrote it, he starred in it. And he was cheap as hell, which was very cool to see as a child. Because in Hollywood, you think of extravagant expense and people throwing money around. It was his money, so he knew better. And a lot of the kids learned the lesson from that. I was having dinner with Melissa Gilbert, and she said, you know, it's so interesting that none of us ended up like robbing a dry cleaner or, you know, the other things you hear about in rehab.
Yes,
and we all
totally
said
right.
It's because of Michael Landon. Like, he picked kids that were hard workers, but then he also taught us those very basic ethics that you actually saw on the show about showing up with your lines learned, hitting your mark, and the pride of you know, an honest day's work. And anyway, we took all that with us. So
and you
wound
wound up at Harvard and then
funny
Fox.
Stories. Yep,
it's the best. I'm going to buy that book. It is great.
I would expect nothing less.
I'm going to. Thanks. See ya.
All right.
Coming up, we're going to close the show with an important announcement for all of our viewers, and we're going to tell you what that is when we come back. Stay tuned.
It's the Phillips League.
Well, we haven't been here long, but this show is moving. Our friend Megyn Kelly is moving on to pursue a new adventure at NBC, and we're fortunate enough to move in to her old time slot in 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to start on Monday. We began this show at 7 2 months ago. We told you that people in power tend to lie. We told you that they abuse their power not because they want to, because they're bad people, but because human nature makes it inevitable. And it's the job of the press to call out those abuses. Instead, though, the press often grovels at the feet of the powerful. We promised you we wouldn't do that. We promised you we'd hold the powerful to account. We would pierce pomposity. We'd translate doublespeak. We'd mock smugness, and we'd barbecue nonsense. We'll try to continue to do all of that, but thanks to this new opportunity from Rupert Murdoch and Fox, we'll do it 2 hours later at 9 p.m. Eastern. We're overwhelmed with the support we've got from you, the viewers, and from all our friends here, so thanks. Hope you'll join us for our final night at 7 tomorrow, and starting Monday, it's on to 9 p.m., and our friend Martha McCallum, one of the great people here at Fox, is starting at 7 p.m. January 16th. The O'Reilly Factor is next. We'll see you tomorrow.